Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Shift. It's a program that we have after worship on Sundays where we meet great people and hear about different topics and engage with each other and ask some questions. Well, I was introduced to Trinity back in 1997 by the Tunheims, and it was really a little after that when Trinity responded to Ken and Marlis and how the community came together that really deeply connects me to this place. And today Ken has decided to share his story, and it's one that touches a lot of us here. So welcome. Here's Kenneth.
Thank you, Geraldine. And thank you all for gathering here with us today. Family and all you friends are a blessing. And you have been individually a blessing to each of us along our paths. So thank you again. I'm 85 plus years old, whereas old Abe would say 85 plus some more. Geraldine has asked me several times, very sensitively, I would add, if I would share some of my feelings of this faith journey since 1999, and I have declined. I haven't been sure I could share in a manner that would be of value to your faith, and it's still emotional for Marlis and our family and me. I respect that each of our journeys of grief, anger, questions, and hope are usually different. Hopefully today I can share in a way that will be a little help to you. First, I'll confess to you that I'm a very experienced sinner. I've had faith questions, particularly at multiple times of deep grief. But I do believe in God's promise, and I'm depending on grace. You know, I'm really glad there's a New Testament and Jesus. This sharing could go on too long, so I've divided actually my written thoughts this time around into 6 sections to hopefully avoid going off into stray paths. But it'd be okay if you'd say a little prayer on the side to help me through. June 1999. Our son Paul, Laura's husband Don, and a couple of very, very good friends were with me on a beautiful remote fly-in Canada lake. Fishing was great. Catching was great. It was truly God's creation. On the second night, we received a cryptic message via shortwave radio to pack up our stuff because there's an airplane be there at daybreak to pick us up because there was a family tragedy. It was followed by a quick note that said it did not involve Marlis, but she would tell me details when we got back to base camp. When back at base camp, Marlis slowly told me that our son Scott, his wife Barb, Zoe at 5 years old, and Noah at 2 had all been killed in Africa. Their car was struck from behind while they were waiting to make a turn. They were pushed into a path of a loaded cement truck, and all killed We hope instantly. Through questions and tears, Marla said, "Kent, I don't know how, but we'll get through this together." She then said, "Don't you drive." And I can hardly wait that we can hold each other. I'll tell you with pride, Scott was a brilliant scholar. He was a champion high school debater. He was convinced he could change the world. He graduated with honors from Wayzata High and St. Olaf. He joined the Peace Corps in Lesotho, Africa. He was a champion for women's rights and peace and justice. He was awarded the first Sergeant Shriver Peace Corps scholarship to Georgetown University. And he was completing his doctorate from the University of Wisconsin when he was killed. In 2008, he was named Distinguished Alumni of Wayzata High. Micah 6:8. I wasn't really into Micah, but our son Paul reminded us that Micah 6:8 was Scott's life guide. It's worth highlighting in your Bibles. And those brothers were much closer than I realized. I'd like to emphasize to you right now, watch for and appreciate relationships between your kids, your grandkids, and maybe your great-grandkids. It's another blessing. So, why was Scott and his family killed? I'll tell you, my faith was not strong. It was a long ride home from Canada, and I was thankful for those who drove. I actually appreciated a lot of silence. Tough first days. I was so thankful for Marlis and an understanding family and supportive friends, but my head was spinning and angry. Among other things, I had a hard time getting dead bodies out of South Africa because of frustrating and irritating bureaucracy. I did not maintain a Christian demeanor. Finally, sensitive politicians locally here, plus the head of Peace Corps, who was a father of a roommate of Scott's who was here today, helped a lot. They showed thoughtfulness with action. Scott and family were delivered to Wayzata with blood-soaked clothes still on. I was not understanding. Marlis was stopped for speeding, bringing clean clothes to replace the blood-soaked to the funeral home by the police. After sobbing, and my understanding, hysterical explanation, the police turned very sensitive and offered to escort her. David Lee Funeral Home personnel were wonderfully kind, thoughtful, even spiritual in support. They did extras. And always remember the tremendously supportive friends. A few examples of caring, action caring. First, a casual friend from Trinity invited me to breakfast talk. We became a partner with me at Trinity, including being a partner in a major building renovation here about 20 years ago. And he became a lifelong friend. A neighbor came over and, without asking, mowed our lawn, washed their cars, didn't talk, acted. I called my best friend, Pastor Ron Peterson. I had written him an unsolicited evaluation much earlier at our first church as a married couple. He was totally out of the box for an Elk Mound farm boy, and he broke rules. He was shocked by my unsolicited, caring candor. We became friends. And he helped me become a realist with my Christian faith. Ron was dying of a brain tumor. When I called and his wife held the phone to his ear, and I said, "Ron, I need you." Ron couldn't speak. But his wife said, tears ran down his cheek. He died a couple days later. Just a reminder for us all. Seize your moments. Take a look at your priorities. Put action high on the list. Later, our family was sorting meager belongings of Scott and his family in our garage. There was a lot of tears. Our two-year-old granddaughter stopped us saying, "Hey, we believe they're in heaven, right?" There was some nods and some mumbles. Undeterred, she continued on saying, "We're going to see them again, right?" I think it was silence. And then she said, "Why are we all crying?" That 2-year-old is now a second-year resident doctor as a pediatric doctor. Yep, I'm proud of her. After recovering, we continued to cry, but this time it was for pride and joy. And we also remembered that Zoe, our oldest granddaughter who had been killed, middle name was a Basutu name in Tabasang. We weren't sure what the heck this meant. But we found out it means cause for rejoicing. And ladies and gentlemen, it was. Preparing for a funeral for 4 at Trinity. Pastor Kent knew I was in trouble and gave me a book by the theologian C.S. Lewis entitled A Grief Observed. C.S. questioned God after his new and only wife died suddenly. It was his love of his later life. He questioned a lot. But then he reconfirmed his faith in God and the promises that go with that. Now, I am not a theologian, but if you have any CS questions, ask Charlie in the back there. He'll probably help you out. The honest questions that C.S. Lewis had, and then the reconfirmation of faith in his book were a great help to me. I overheard our son Paul take Kent aside, and he said, "Kent, my dad, just lost his best friend, Ron Peterson, and you need to step up." I was a little shocked by his directness, but I was proud of his caring. Kent stepped up, and he's a friend to this day. I also contacted Father O'Michael, his office, and they told me, well, he's really tied up. He's a featured speaker in some Catholic conference in southern Minnesota, but we'll contact him anyway. The message came back almost immediately. Michael said, "I'll be there and I will read the obituary if Kent will write it." Father Michael owed me nothing. He gave, he acted a lot, even if he wasn't Lutheran. The funeral at Trinity, here. First of all, Scott and Barb were married at Trinity here about 8 years prior to that day. Many of you were here with us. It was a time of joy, full house. Marlis and I were honored to be escorting Scott down the aisle to this altar up here to honor their marriage. The organ was playing the prelude. We were ready. Scott ran over to Marlis. There was an animated conversation I could see, strong hugs, and Marlis ran over to me, grabbed me with hands on both sides of my face, and she said, "Ken." I knew there was a command coming. She said, "Our son Scott will have a hyphenated last name in honor of his new wife, and you will love it." It was another step of unusual for a Norwegian Lutheran farm boy. And then we triumphantly escorted Scott to this altar. 1999 was a different day. We were overwhelmed then by the packed Trinity Church and narthex with friends and caring associates. There were 4 caskets. I don't remember the many caring words from friends, but I do remember people there. The choir sang. I appreciated that. Father Michael read the obituary with extra meaning. I will always remember Kent's inspired sermon. First of all, pray honest prayers. He said, God will understand your questions, and he'll tolerate your anger. Number 2, trust in God. That was a little bit harder, but I tried to do that. And 3rd, learn to love life again. Kent called me this last week again and encouraged me and apologized for not being able to be here. But I thank you, Kent, for being our pastor and our friend. To close the service, a gifted lady sang the Nunc Dimittis. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but anyway, it's documented in the 2nd chapter of Luke. The Song of Simeon. It's beautiful, it's moving, it's inspiring, it's emotional, it's worth looking up, 2nd chapter of Luke. The drive to Lakewood Cemetery with our whole family in the car was emotional, and surprisingly, it almost seemed short. There was a lot of activity going on. I won't review it all, Laura. I don't remember the caring words at gravesite, but I remember there was a lot of people there to support us. The gravesite closure included a bagpiper playing Amazing Grace. He walked around the gravesite, then he began walking off in the distance until we couldn't hear him anymore. Yes, I'm still counting on amazing grace. Life after the funeral. I did not think we needed any family counseling. Marlis was smarter. She developed an evaluation criteria, interviewed several candidates to be our counselor, and she planned biasly to select a woman. But she ended up selecting a man that Kent had recommended. Joel Weiberg listened a lot. He reflected back what he heard from us. He observed. He asked us questions. He became a friend. We had a lot of sessions. He said only a few words. Our kids were much more open and honest with their questions than I had been taught was okay. I was shocked when our Laura said to Joel, "I want to know where Scott and each of his family are right now." She emphasized right now. You know, I don't really remember how Joel answered it, but somehow or other he calmed our aggressive daughter down. She's pretty special. She has a lot of her mother's qualities. Jeremiah 29:11. Father Michael left us this Jeremiah quote of hope during another home visit, and is still on our wall and is worth rereads. As part of my closing remarks, I have found meaningful things to do is important to keep your head working and at least feeling like you're contributing something. Basically, learning to love life again. And being involved with people you respect, very important, like Father Michael, who led the Basilica to new highs for the whole city, really, as part of the guidance from Jeremiah 29:7. And his new wife now, Sue Hayes, and him help fill that need of people that you respect for both Marlis and I. Now, I have not cleared this with Michael or the two ladies, so I could be in trouble, but I think Michael and Martin Luther would have had some very energized conversations with each other. I say that with total respect. But read Jeremiah 29:11 a couple of times. I have read it many times since 1999. I'd like to close with a short epilogue. A few years ago now, Marlis, Laura, and I were reflecting on our lanai down in Naples. There was tears, there was also joy. And Laura said, "I will always remember Kent saying in his sermon, in the midst of our grief, I, Kent Grosser, believe God was the first to cry." Now, I'm not a qualified theologian, but I'm buying God was the first to cry. Amen. You might have some questions.
Well, in the words of Ken, that was an A-plus job, so I commend you. You did it. You did it, and it was good.
Thank you all. Thank you all.
Yeah, and I know how happy he is that you are here, and I would like to invite you to every shift we have. It's going to be this good. This is a way to get a crowd. I love it. Well, Ken, I don't know. There are a lot of things. I mean, Ken talked about putting himself, to work and challenging himself, and he did just that. At Trinity, there were a number of things, and they involved planning for the future. And it was the Joel Committee, Joel 1 and 2, where we planned for the addition that we have here, which is our gym and our educational space, and Ken led that beautifully with, using all his gifts and his experience over a lifetime. And then he continued, and he has shared so many things. He and Marlis are, they walk the walk, and we are just so blessed to have them. And the family is a force. I mean, this is the family you want to have, and the friends. You've cultivated this, and they are here for you, and it's a very beautiful thing. And it sounds like it's just like Scott. When you were talking about him and just sort of his relentlessness and the Peace Corps, it reminded me a little bit of Paul Wellstone, and that kind of frenetic energy. I worked in some newsrooms, and whether it was Alexandria or Minneapolis, he would show up. He would just be right there, like, here's what I want to accomplish. And along that line, you did some things with Paul Wellstone and Walter Mondale, and had some great opportunities as you really carried on some of Scott's initiatives in his name, Scott and Barb.
Yeah, actually, sort of unbelievably, Scott met President Carter in Lesotho, and we have a great picture of Zoe with her arms around her dad and shaking hands with Carter. And so when we kicked off the endowment down at St. Olaf, which several of Scott's friends have been a part of funding, there was some big hitters there: Carter, Mondale, Wellstone, a lot of other local politicians. It felt good that that kind of recognition was there. Maybe selfish, but it felt good that they were there.
What were those initiatives, or what are those initiatives?
Well, there were two primary initiatives. One, we have a large endowment at St. Olaf, which is entitled For Peace and Justice, which is really for undergraduates, for them to study abroad. We emphasized maybe too much to Scott that, going to school and learning out of books was great, but you better get out and feel the real world, get your hands dirty. And I think we overshot on that one. We also had a scholarship for, we started out thinking it would be for 3 years. It ended up being for over 20 down at the University of Wisconsin, for graduate students to go abroad. And we thought that would be only for about 3 years, because we didn't have as many contacts as we do through Totts and to Lars and a number of other people down at St. Olaf, but we did continue it for almost 20 years. We were trying to extend what we felt was the passion of Scott, even though he wasn't here.
And you did. And when he says Totts, he's talking about Eric's roommate, Eric Tottsrud, who is now a federal judge. And that kind of, boy, that's a lot of energy between him and Scott.
Yeah. We think of Eric, Marlis and I think of him as another son, a great son. He and Scott were high octaners, overachievers, idealistic, overly driven, sometimes a little hard to tolerate. They did a lot of escapades that parents don't know about. But they were achievers, and you're right. Totts is now a federal district judge, which is a great achievement. It recognizes the intelligence and the skill sets he has, but much more important, Lori and Totts are godparents for our grandson, Scott. So be sure you do it right.
I know you told me about conversations that you had with Scott while he was in a London hospital. Can you talk about that a little?
Yeah, I'll try to keep it short. We got a call in March of 1999 that Scott was near death. Frankly, I didn't even know he was in London, but he'd been asked to be there to speak at a seminar to promote women's rights in Mozambique, where the women weren't allowed to vote or own property. And he had actually caught malaria before he left Mozambique then at that time, but it hit him when he was in London. And I contacted Dr. Ken Temporal when I heard about this, because Scott had felt, I think I'm saying this right, falciparum malaria. And Ken said, I don't mean to be too negative, but I just want to prepare you. We had large outbreaks of that in Vietnam with our soldiers, and the death rate was about 85%. Laura was expecting Hannah, and so Marla stayed back here, and I went over there. They gave me a room in the hospital. I stayed right next to him. We had a lot of in-depth conversation, probably the most extended that I had had. And Scott said, I thought I was going to die, Dad, but I'm glad I didn't. And then he went on to say that he wasn't sure he should tell me, but he had been playing poker with executives in Mozambique with the intent of influencing them to make some changes for women's rights. And he said, hard to say this, but I have found that I'm having more impact working directly with the politicians than I was giving lectures at seminars. Then he added, I hope Grandma Jensen isn't watching, but I'm really good at poker.
I'm glad to hear that part. You know, family is really important to you, and that is the right thing. Tell me about some of the joy this tribe brings you.
I'm glad you asked that question. Yeah, it's a special thing. On our first trip to the Peace Corps to visit Scott, we were in Lesotho, Africa. Scott really thought it was important that us old people were embedded in the culture. He was more driven than he had to be. We were staying in a mud and dung hut that was not varmint-proof. Marlis was not comfortable. Actually, I wasn't either, but I didn't admit it. We were concerned about that, but also that our son was just, we felt, overdriven.
I don't know where he gets that.
We spent several nights going out and looking at the moon, worrying about our son, reflecting. We shared that back with our family, and they've done a good job of keeping the memories and the life of Scott alive to most of these people who weren't even born when he was killed. And so now it's common. Well, the other thing I need to add quickly, Marlis had this non-theologically based feeling that Scott was somehow associated with the moon. Maybe because we've been out looking at it late at night. But we have multiple calls from kids and more from grandkids saying, "Grandma, have you seen the moon tonight?" And it's reassuring for her. I don't know about theology, but it's okay. It means a lot to get that kind of caring and feedback from your family.
It does. I don't know if it's appropriate to take any questions. I'm certain that if you had, well, good. Thanks for kicking this off for me, Sue.
My name is Sue Hayes, and I was part of the beginning of the Jeremiah program. For those of you who don't know what the Jeremiah program is, it's a program to break 2 cycles of poverty between a mother and her child. Michael O'Connell is the founder, and we took about 6 years to get this program off the ground. Lots of peaks and valleys along the way. Today there are 9 Jeremiah programs throughout this country. I came into contact with Ken in the formative years of the program. And one of the aspects was, how do we gather single moms who need an education in order to get a job, in order to lift themselves and their children out of poverty? So I've been hearing about Scott's affinity for women's rights and women's abilities, and he comes by it genetically, I believe. Came by it genetically. Because one of our stumbling blocks was, how do we find part-time jobs for young women with a high school degree who are trying to achieve a life goal for themselves and their children? A lot of people came in and out of those conversations, but one day I met Ken Jenson. Ken Jensen, I didn't know at all, but I didn't know anybody who was coming into the Jeremiah program. Our common thread was, how do we do this? And Ken's contribution was, you're looking for part-time jobs for these young women? Well, I'll do that. And everyone looked at him and said, really? No one else knew where to start or how to do it. Ken did. He was a retired executive. He knew people he could call and say, isn't this a great idea? How could you turn me down? And he did that. And it was a really big step and really helped launch the program. So this is a man you're lucky to know. I'm lucky to know him, and I'm lucky to know Marlis, because they came into my life trying to help somebody else.
Now you know why. Now you know why Father Michael got this dispensation and married this lady.
Well, thank you for sharing this. It was a long time coming, and it was obviously at your own pace. But I think that, just you sitting here speaking, having your family alive and well, and doing the work that you do for everyone has enriched all of us. and more, and that is a gift. You know, some people never recover, and I'm not saying you have recovered, but you have moments of joy, and that, you know, is something. It really is something, and just grateful and send much love. I love working
Thank you
with
to all you folks. Thank you very much. Thank you.
really well. Really well. He did it. You know what I teach him? Marcus is right.
Quite a bit.
And I'm always right. I'm always right. You are.
Thank you, Gerald.
Yeah.
Well done. From the depths of this.